Okay. Chaim Racha. The days of our years are 70. And Hasidim translate this as Imeshin Asenu, not just that there are days, not just that man's life is 70 years, but Imeshin Asenu, there are days that are like years. One of those days is today, the 11th day of Shvat, which now we are Shivim Shana, we're 70 years from the day the Rebbe accepted the leadership of Lubavitch. At that time, maybe it was shortly, maybe it was a little afterwards, Rebbe spoke about how different kinds of trees take different amount of time to blossom and grow fruit, and how the carob tree takes 70 years for it to carob, the date tree took 70 years for it to grow, and just unbelievable. They were playing last night, people who were discussing the Rebbe's first day at the job, so to speak, and where we are today. And so this tremendous koyach, tremendous strength that we received today on this special day that the Rebbe Chassidim say that, just like it says in the my internet connection is unstable. Should I move rooms? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So basically, just it's a big day, and we gotta receive what's been given to us today. And in that spirit, let's continue on learning this from bringing from Tavshin Chovav Yud Shvat. We are on. We're on page 30, Oisir Aleph. Another idea that comes to light based upon our discussion till now about Zare B'chaim, that the reason why we find around the world that there are people that are living with the inspiration of Frierdiker Rebbe indicates that his whole life to begin with was totally spiritual, total Avos Yisrael. And that's why he actually animates people with his spirit, because in order to be able to animate another person in that kind of way that he is doing till today, it must mean that if that proves that even while he was alive, a soul in the body, the physicality meant nothing. Because Alter Rebbe says in Tanya that the amount of Avos Yisrael you have has to do with how important the neshama is. So when we find this concept of people which are alive today and they're living with his inspiration, that indicates that the kind of inspiration he was giving was something that had no limitation at all. It was totally from the neshama, the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the body, the material meant nothing, and that's why it accomplished this animation of Jews all around the world to live in his spirit. As we learned in the last class at length. Okay, another idea which we learn now based upon this idea. We have to make a point. There's a mistake the world makes and thinks that every year this idea gets weaker. You have to know that the opposite is the truth. Since we're talking about life, concerning life, the Torah says that the more years you have, the more wisdom you have. But this is something that God gave to the choice of every single Jew. You can't force the guy. Instead, Hashem tells us, choose life. And the words the Torah uses, choose life, Hashem says, choose B'chaim. B'chaim is similar to the letter Hey in this instance, in that it means choose the life. Choose like the famous life that everyone knows about. As Rashi says, that Hashem is like a person, tells his son, choose a good portion in my inheritance. And he sets him up and tells him, this is what you should choose. God puts our hand on the good stuff and he says, this is what you should choose. So what's our choice in this regard, in this subject? Hashem has placed us on the good portion, and Hashem tells us that, as the Gemara says, the body follows the head. This is the head whose life was completely spiritual. And since his life was always spiritual, therefore he's alive today as well. Because since the physical body never was what defined his life at all, so therefore when that garment was taken and exchanged for another one, that does not detract at all of his life, because that never was what his life was about. But Adrabah, Yeser Teikef of Yeser Eis, not only is he still alive, but with greater strength and greater power. Every year, on the day of his passing, the tzaddik ascends to a new, higher chamber in heaven. And after the head, the body goes. So where the head goes to a higher chamber, it draws the body, meaning it draws all the Jewish people with him. If he is the head of the Jewish people and he is alive, so when he goes to a new place, he draws all the Jewish people with him. This that's the purpose of having a farbrengen on the day of Yushvat. As a Friedrich writes in his letter about his father's anniversary of passing, the first anniversary of his father's passing, the 2nd of Nisan, that the purpose of the farbrengen is to strengthen ourselves and strengthen all of the matters of the Friedrich Rebbe that he put his life into and he sacrificed himself for. This also helps his children who are alive. And through this adds more life to the Friedrich Rebbe. And this in turn causes more life to his children. In other words, it's a symbiotic relationship. The addition in life that's achieved by the Chassidim, by their bringing it together, and they're adding in all the matters of the Friedrich Rebbe, that, so to speak, adds life to the Friedrich Rebbe. And that also channels more bracha to all of his children. With children and health and parnasa in a very comfortable way. Okay, so in short, what we just said was that people think things get weaker. The contrary, instead of things getting weaker every year, things get stronger, because with life, the way life works is that the more years you have, the more wisdom you have. So the Friedrich Rebbe every year goes to a higher place, and he draws all those who are connected to him to that higher place. And therefore bringing together and deciding to do more in those matters that he dedicated his life for, that adds to his life. And that also in turn brings bracha from where he is to all those who add in all these inyanim that he dedicated his life for. This will help us understand why the Friedrich Rebbe made such an effort to have two different, completely opposite extremes of children. Meaning, he made an effort to have children to be alive spiritually, but his efforts covered a very wide spectrum, one extreme to another. The Friedrich Rebbe wasn't satisfied in keeping Torah mitzvahs himself perfectly, but he also demanded from others to keep Torah perfectly. The Friedrich Rebbe demanded from those who were able to do this, not only should they study Torah, but they should study Torah with love and reverence of Hashem. And he wasn't satisfied with by people learning Chassidus. So he wanted that when people study Chassidus, it should be in a way that they're attached to it. And when the Friedrich Rebbe wanted people to have dveikos and they're learning Chassidus, he didn't want it to be in a way that they lose themselves in the Chassidus and they have klei nefesh, like Nadav and Avihu, that they just got lost in this higher ecstasy and their learning, and it had no practical implication. If Frikab wanted, when you learn Chassidus, it should be in a way that you're attached to it. But that should affect, he demanded from those who were able to reach this level, that their learning of Chassidus should cause some kind of change in the whole way they behave. That should be noticeable, that this is a person studying Chassidus. While they eat, while they drink, while doing all physical things. That even while they're eating and drinking, they shouldn't be connected to the physicality of what they're doing. As you could see in the Imarim, the Sichas to Frierdiker Rebbe, especially those he said in his first years of leadership. Those who did not measure up to his demands heard from him very sharp rebuke. And seemingly, think about it. Sounds a little rough. We're talking about someone who studies Torah. He does mitzvahs, and he's very careful doing mitzvahs. He does them beautifully. But he's not mahadrin min mahadrin. He's not doing them in the most beautiful way. So why are you so hard on him? Why are you being so sharp with somebody who is really doing so well? But nevertheless, next page, 32 on top. He didn't just do this once or twice. He didn't just do this for one person. But there are many people that we see this kind of attitude, that he expected people to reach a certain level of Yiddishkeit, and he wasn't satisfied with them being in a certain level. Together with this demand, they should learn Chassidus, they should learn Gemara, and they should be noticeable in the way you behave. That they're a person that studies Chassidus whenever you eat and whenever you drink, and you shouldn't feel the physicality of it. Together with this, at the very same time he's involved in trying to help the Chassidim learn Chassidus in a way that affects their life, he also was involved in activities to help those who had no connection to Torah mitzvahs. You couldn't talk to them about anything else. All you could tell them is, you are a grandson of Jacob. Your grandson of Isaac, grandson of Abraham. To remind them they were born Jewish. Because that they forgot already too. If they don't even know they're Jewish, you can understand what level they were on. So the Frierdiker devoted himself to that person too, and also with sacrifice to that person as well. The Frierdiker devoted himself with sacrifice to those who didn't know they were Jewish with the same dedication as those who were top of the top. But and even those who were first keeping Torah, and then they decided not to keep Torah, which the Gemara says that that's like the worst thing. Even for that person who was originally into it and he's stopped being into it, the Frierdiker have a serious nefesh for that person as well, because of a doubt, maybe he'll be able to be successful. So he finds that Frierdiker he dedicates his life. He texts Zev there. I want to see his face, please. You text Zev? Yeah. He disappeared. I want to see his face. Okay, so the Frierdiker Rebbe had Mesiras Nefesh for those who were not in the level of Torah mitzvahs on a level of perfection, and he demanded, it was sharp expression, like you really have to shape up. And he also dedicated himself equally to those people who forgot they were Jewish, and even people who knew better and they were religious and they stopped being religious. He also dedicated his whole being to help them. For example, the Frierdiker made an effort in Russia that people should say Kametz Alafa. And in some corner in Russia, some far off place, there should be children saying Kametz Alafa. But in another corner of Russia, he wanted the people to study Chassidus on Thursday night till morning. So on the one hand, he's telling somebody, go to this in the city and to teach this child Aleph Beis. And at the same time, he's asking another chassid, why are you not up all night on Thursday night studying chassidus? Also in the Friedrich arrived in America, we find the two extremes in his efforts when he arrived in America too. The Friedrich arrived in America. One of the first things he did, we made the yeshiva of Timchat Mimim. This is a yeshiva which studies chassidus, and they study nigla. And the Friedrich wanted that when they study Gemara, it should be noticeable that they're learning Gemara with the same light and vitality and warmth of chassidus. He wanted their learning should impact their study of Gemara and their behavior. But in the very same time, there are other children that were not getting any religious education at all. Not a religious education, not a Jewish education. The only education they were receiving was going to public school. So the Friedrich Rebbe wanted, and he looked for people to teach these children who are going to public school, not getting any Jewish education, to teach these children Aleph Beis in English. You couldn't teach them Aleph Beis in Lashon Kodesh. Teach them Aleph Beis in English. And he dedicated time, and he put aside other important things to him for that, just in order to establish that children should be able to learn Aleph Beis. And in these two extremes, and he's making the yeshiva Timchat Mimim, where they should learn chassidus, and they should be on this high level. And the other extreme, teaching these children who are going to public school Aleph Beis, in both extremes, it was necessary for sacrifice to accomplish these two things. And he devoted himself with the same sacrifice and the same excitement for these two extremes of two completely divergent objectives. And how is that possible? I mean, there's some people which are into one or the other. How come the Friedrich Rebbe had an equal devotion to these two extremes? The answer is Shianesenis. The answer is that the question really is the answer. Now, I'm going to continue paraphrasing from the Hebrew on page 33. When there is a mitzvah that the Torah itself calls the light of the light, and not a weighty mitzvah, and there's another mitzvah Torah calls chamur shebachmor, a really heavy, important mitzvah. So if you're approaching Yiddishkeit with logic, even with holy logic, there are parameters that you say this thing pushes away that thing, this thing pushes away that thing, as it says in the poskim, in halacha. But then there is another way of serving Hashem, and that is with sacrifice. That you feel that there's a Jew at the other end of the world who's missing something. And since he's a Jew who's a part of Hashem, as it says in Tanya, that this is by every single Jew, doesn't matter who, as it says in chapter 1 in Tanya. So feeling this, not just in your mind, but on the contrary, the main place this is felt is in the very core of your soul. When you feel in the very core of your soul that Jew is missing something, and a Jew is a part of Hashem, and the essence of your soul is above logic. It's above action, above everything else. Everything, and the essence of the soul is above every part of the soul. So when there is an attachment and there's attraction from one essence to the other essence, in other words, you feel another Jew, and you feel the other Jew from your essence. And what do you feel about the other Jew? You feel what their essence is, that they're a part of Hashem. Then you devote yourself completely to worry about that person, that this person is missing something. So when the guy is missing mahadran, mina mahadran, he's missing just he's not serving Hashem in the most beautiful way that he possibly can. So Chassidus says about the faculty of desire, that when you want, let's say, my example, if we want, let's say, to learn a whole tractate of Gemara, and the Gemara has, let's say, 43 pages, you need 42 pages, if your desire is to finish the tractate, you haven't even started your desire to be fulfilled, because your desire is about to finish the tractate. If your desire is to get to graduate medical school, even though you've done all the tests and you haven't done the last bit of residence, you haven't gotten your degree, you haven't nothing of your desire has been fulfilled. Even if the tiniest bit is missing, you're missing everything. And therefore, the Friedrich Rebbe, since his essence felt the essence of another Jew, he devoted himself completely with his very core to help a person who wasn't really reaching the place he's supposed to reach. He's missing something. And so too, when we're talking about another Jew, he's barely nicknamed a Jew. It's just a nickname. And when the Torah says that there are certain names that are halachically called your name. There's some things which are just called a nickname because the fact that that's your name is not really noticed, not really known. It's a secret, sort of. So then it's called a kinui. It's called a nickname. That means his Jewishness. He's called a Jew, but only as a nickname. What that means is his Jewishness is so hidden that for that person also, the Frierdiker Rebbe devotes his life with sacrifice to help that Jew too. And why is this? Because every detail in the service of Hashem, serving of Hashem has to be with detail, has to be in an orderly way. In order that in a certain place, a teacher should arrive in that place and to talk about teaching Kometz Alafa, you have to find a teacher, you have to give him a ticket, and you tell him where to go, what he should do there, how he should set himself up there. So there's a lot of details involved in every single mission. And so too, when you're talking about someone who is not staying up all Thursday night to study Chassidus, and why he's not davening Shachris on Shabbos 3 hours more than he is. So these involve a lot of details. You have to explain to the guy what he needs to do, etc. So, but the approach of all these details isn't with the calculation of logic. Rather, the Frierdiker Rebbe's approach was with sacrifice. That means sacrifice permeated everything he did. And so too, page 34, so too regarding his children who are alive. As his children are alive, so too he is alive. So too regarding his children, when someone gives his life for his children, there isn't and there can't be any limitation in measurement. We're talking about Chassidus, he's there, totally giving himself that this person should have Chassidus. We're talking about Kometz Alafa, he's not there. If you're serving Hashem with sacrifice, it doesn't matter what your child needs. This behavior, the Frierdiker Rebbe indicates, in other words, if you're serving Hashem in a way that you care about someone learning Chassidus, but you don't care about a person learning Aleph base, that indicates that you're not really serving Hashem with sacrifice. That means you're serving Hashem with some kind of calculation. Maybe a calculation that's sanctioned by the code of Jewish law. Maybe the Torah itself sanctions and says this is something that you're supposed to be doing. But there's a time when a calculation has to be made, but not when someone's life is in danger. When you need to save a Jew, the Jew shouldn't assimilate, then the Torah says, even the code of Jewish law says, that someone's life is in danger, desecrate the Shabbos, and not just anyone should desecrate the Shabbos. Shulchan Aruch says specifically someone who is more knowledgeable and considered in a greater stature spiritually, he is the one who has to desecrate the Shabbos first to express how everyone should know that this is not an avera, it's not a sin to desecrate the Shabbos to save someone's life. You desecrate the Shabbos, and who desecrates the Shabbos? Specifically the one who is considered to be in the highest level spiritually. And we find this by the Frierdiker Rebbe. At the very same time, the Frierdiker Rebbe was involved in printing Chassidus, the deepest concept of Chassidus. He also was involved in writing his memoirs, the memoirs of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the 3-volume series. And in this, we find something that people wondered about a lot. What was the point of this? Writing his memoirs takes up time, takes attention, it takes effort. You can't do both at once. When you're writing your memoirs, you can't at the same time write a mimer. You can't write something else. And so too, when you're writing a mimer in Chassidus or in Nigla, you can't write your memoirs. So writing his memoirs was something that certainly took up time and on the expense of other things. And the greater question is, as Gemara says, what's the need? Where the vegetables enter, let the meat enter. What's the need to give a person a book of memoirs when it's better to give him a mimer? In that same half hour, instead of reading the memoirs, the Frierdiker Rebbe let him learn a mimer. Instead of giving the vegetables, give the meat. If he doesn't know Hebrew, so send him the Maimer in Yiddish. And if that's hard for him, so then there's another book. Let him read Pakeach Ivrim or easy Maimer in Yiddish. So if you're looking at it from a logical perspective, logic of Kedusha, you can't really explain this. But when is all this true? When you're not thinking about a Jew who is sinking in the sea of Amaratzis. The Jew is sinking in the sea of ignorance. But we're talking about someone who's standing at the end of the river and he sees a Jew who's drowning, and the guy doesn't even know that he's drowning. So how can you make calculations then? The first thing you need to do is pull him out of the river. If you can't pull him out of the river through a mimer, then do this through a mimer and nigla. And if you can't do it through a mimer and nigla, teaching a Gemara, then do this with a pasuk and chumash in Yiddish. And if that doesn't help, then tell him that then bring him out of the river through a story that the story will bother him until he'll be in a better place, in a place of light. So too regarding what we're talking about over here, when the Friedrich Rebbe saw that there's some Jews that he cannot influence them through a mimer, he can't influence them to the teachings of Gemara, and he can't influence them through a pasuk of chumash in Yiddish, he started writing his memoirs. The Friedrich Rebbe saw that there could be 1 Jew, 2 Jews, 10 Jews, 100 Jews, and then they'll have 100 families as they grow up, that they won't bring in their house anything that was written in Yiddish or in English if it's not something which is interesting to them. And if it don't interest their animal soul, they won't bring it in their house. They only bring things in their house which they consider interesting. So you have to also give them the content about Hashem and His Torah and His mitzvahs in a way that they'll want to bring it in their house. And so you can't change the content. You can only change the form. So therefore, the Friedrich Rebbe changed just the bottle, the container. So this Jew who is sinking in Ruchnius, he should be able to think and make a mistake and say, oh, it's just a story. And we'll start reading it, as the Torah says, we taste and see that Hashem is good. And that's why the Friedrich was involved in writing his memoirs, using the fact that when people, the people were interested in knowing about his life and his father's life and his grandfather's life, so he used the opportunity to inspire people. Okay, so I just want to point out before we conclude for today that the Rebbe is saying how the memoirs are really important for those people who are not knowledgeable in Yiddishkeit and they're not knowledgeable in Chassidus, they can't learn Chassidus. I just want to point out that just a phenomena that I've noticed, that learning the memoirs, the Friedrich Rebbe, gives a person a sense of right and wrong in a very natural way, without thinking too deeply into it, without meditating into it. As Rebbe says over here, there's a content there, and you're reading it because it's interesting, but it really does something. It's something transformational that is achieved by studying the Friedrich Rebbe's memoirs. You see over here, the Rebbe says how Friedrich Rebbe, how he had sacrificed, and he sacrificed other things to write these memoirs. It's, I think, a great decision coming out of Yud Shvat is to not only study Chassidus, but to take time and to learn and to share with our family the memoirs of Friedrich Rebbe. It's literally a transformational thing. You read it and you don't even know what kind of sense of right and wrong you're receiving, and it helps, just the way you look at the world. Anyways, have a great day, everybody. Great day, Michal Mordechai. Great day, Dr. Bressman. Great day, Jeff. Great day, Nachman Mendel. These are out.